The sky above Etherian burned with colors that had no names in any human language. Lyran stood at the edge of the crystal platform and watched her world die slowly. The silver-haired elf woman closed her eyes for a moment and felt the ancient magic fading from the air, like breath leaving a dying body. Behind her, the massive form of Ashenwing shifted on the stone ground. The dragon's scales caught the strange light and threw it back in shades of purple and black that seemed to move on their own. They had been fighting for so long now. Years blended into decades and decades into centuries until time itself lost meaning. The Voidborn came from somewhere beyond the edges of reality, and they consumed everything they touched. Worlds went silent. Stars blinked out. Entire civilizations vanished as if they had never existed at all. And the 5 great races of the galaxy kept fighting each other, even as extinction crept closer with each passing day. Lyran opened her eyes and looked down at the ancient book in her hands. The pages were made from something that was not quite paper, and the words written on them glowed with a faint blue light. She had found it in the deepest vault beneath the temple, where the oldest memories of her people were kept locked away. The prophecy written there spoke of a being from a world untouched by magic, a creature whose mind held no ancient grudges and whose heart carried no inherited hatred. A human. Ashenwing lifted his great head and spoke directly into her mind. The dragon's voice was like thunder rolling across distant mountains. You know what the council will say. They will call you mad for even considering this plan. Lyran ran her fingers across the glowing words in the book. She had studied them for months now and memorized every symbol and curve of the ancient script. The council has been calling me mad for the last 100 years. What difference will one more accusation make now? The dragon made a sound that might have been laughter or might have been sadness. It was hard to tell with dragons sometimes. This ritual has never been attempted before. You could tear a hole in reality itself. You could destroy what remains of our world trying to save it. Lyran looked back at her companion and partner of countless battles. The bond between them ran deeper than friendship or loyalty. They were 2 parts of one soul split across 2 bodies. Then we destroy it trying. Better than sitting here and waiting for the Voidborn to do it for us. Better than watching our people fade away into nothing while we argue and debate and do nothing. She turned back to the platform and began drawing symbols in the air with her fingers. Each gesture left trails of silver light hanging suspended in space. The magic came harder now than it used to. The world had less to give, and what remained was precious beyond measure. But Lyran poured everything she had into the working. She shaped the spell with desperate precision and wove the ancient words of power into patterns that had not been used since before recorded history began. The air above the platform began to shimmer and twist. Reality folded in on itself like paper being crumpled by invisible hands. Ashenwing moved closer and added his own power to the ritual. Dragonfire mixed with elven magic, and the combination created something new and terrifying. Lightning cracked across dimensions and thunder rolled through worlds that existed only in mathematics and theory. Somewhere very far away on a planet called Earth, a man named Jake Morrison was hiking through the Rocky Mountains. He had taken the week off work to clear his head and get away from the noise of the city. The trail wound through pine trees and across rocky slopes where the air was thin and clean. Jake had been walking for hours and his legs were starting to feel the burn of constant climbing. He stopped to catch his breath and take a drink from his water bottle. The sky above him suddenly turned the wrong color. Jake looked up and saw purple lightning streak across clouds that had not been there a moment before. The air around him began to vibrate with a sound too low to hear, but strong enough to feel in his bones. He stumbled backward and dropped his water bottle. It fell to the ground but never made a sound. Everything went silent. The wind stopped blowing. The birds stopped singing. Even his own heartbeat seemed to pause, mid-rhythm. Then the world twisted sideways, and Jake fell through a hole in space itself. He landed hard on smooth crystal that should have shattered under the impact but somehow held firm. Jake rolled onto his side and gasped for air that tasted different than any he had ever breathed before. His vision swam with colors and shapes that made no sense. When his eyes finally focused, he found himself staring at a woman who could not possibly exist. Lyran knelt beside the human and studied him carefully. He looked so fragile lying there on the platform. His clothing was strange and made from materials she did not recognize. His face held an expression of pure terror mixed with confusion. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his forehead. The telepathic link formed instantly and she felt his mind touch hers. "Be calm," You are safe now. I know you have many questions, and I will answer all of them in time. Jake jerked away from her touch and scrambled backward until his back hit something warm and scaled. He spun around and came face to face with the largest creature he had ever seen. Ashenwing lowered his massive head and regarded the human with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. Jake's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. His brain tried to process what he was seeing but kept hitting walls of impossibility. Dragons were not real. Magic was not real. Telepathic elf women were definitely not real. He was having a stroke or a mental breakdown, or maybe he had fallen and hit his head on the trail. This is not a dream or an illness. You are awake and your mind is intact. My name is Lyran and this is Ashenwing. We have brought you here from your world because we desperately need your help. The elf woman's voice in his head was gentle but firm. Jake looked at her again and saw the exhaustion in her eyes. He saw the way her hands trembled slightly despite her calm expression. He saw a being pushed to the absolute edge of endurance by circumstances beyond her control. Where am I? What is this place? How are you in my head? Lyran stood and offered Jake her hand. He hesitated for a long moment before taking it. She pulled him to his feet with surprising strength. You are on Etherian, or what remains of it. This world was once beautiful beyond description, but now it is dying. I am in your head because my people communicate this way when words are not enough, and you are here because an ancient prophecy spoke of humans as the only hope for the galaxy. Jake looked around and finally took in his surroundings properly. The platform stood in the middle of what looked like ruins. Broken towers reached toward that strange burning sky. Crystal structures lay shattered across scorched ground. In the distance, something massive and dark moved across the horizon like a stain spreading across reality itself. What is that thing? That is the Voidborn. They come from beyond our dimension and they consume everything they touch. Matter and energy and even time itself means nothing to them. They have been eating the galaxy piece by piece for longer than you can imagine, and we have been unable to stop them because we cannot stop fighting each other long enough to try. Lyran walked to the edge of the platform and gestured at the devastated landscape. Jake followed her and felt his stomach drop at the scale of destruction laid out before him. 5 great races share this galaxy. The elves like myself, the draconians who are reptilian warriors, the hive mind with their insectoid queens, the lumini who are beings of pure energy, and the marrow who rule the deep waters of 1,000 worlds. For thousands of years we have been at war with each other. Old wounds and older grudges have kept us divided even as extinction comes for us all. Jake shook his head slowly. This was too much information too fast. His brain felt like it was trying to process 100 thoughts at once and failing at all of them. And you think I can help with that somehow? I'm just one guy. I design security systems for office buildings. I'm not a soldier or a diplomat or anything special. You are human. That makes you the most special being in the galaxy right now. Ashenwing spoke for the first time and his voice filled Jake's mind like rolling thunder. The dragon moved closer and his shadow fell across both of them. Your people were isolated on Earth long ago by beings far older than any of our races. The precursors placed humans there and hid your world from the rest of the galaxy. We do not know why they did this, but we know it was intentional. You carry something in your nature that makes you unique. You have no connection to our ancient wars, no species memory of the betrayals and atrocities we have committed against each other. Your mind is neutral ground in a galaxy where such a thing has not existed for eons. Lyran turned to face Jake fully. Her silver hair moved in a wind he could not feel and her eyes reflected that strange burning sky. There is a ritual, a way to unite the 5 races through a single consciousness, to create a bond that will allow us to fight together instead of against each other, but it requires someone with no ties to any of our peoples, someone whose mind can hold all of us at once without being torn apart by the weight of our histories. Jake felt his blood run cold. He understood what she was asking. Now, even though part of him wanted desperately not to, understand. You want to use me as some kind of mental bridge between 5 alien species who hate each other. Yes. And if this does not work, then you will die and the dark shapes moved across the sky like oil spreading over water. Jake watched them come closer and felt something primal awaken in his chest. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to run, but there was nowhere to go. Lyran grabbed his arm and pulled him toward Ashenwing. The dragon lowered his body close to the ground and spread one massive wing to create a shelter. Get on his back now. We must leave this place immediately. Jake did not argue. He climbed onto the dragon's back and grabbed onto the ridges of scale that ran along the creature's spine. Lyrian jumped up behind him with fluid grace and wrapped one arm around his waist to hold him steady. Ashenwing launched into the air with such force that Jake's stomach dropped into his feet. The ground fell away beneath them, and suddenly they were flying through that strange burning sky. Behind them, the Voidborn descended on the crystal platform. Where they touched the ground, reality simply ceased to exist. The ancient stones that had stood for millennia vanished without sound or trace. It was not destruction in any normal sense. It was erasure. Complete and absolute removal from existence itself. Jake looked back and immediately wished he had not. The creatures were like holes in the world, shaped vaguely like living things. They had forms that hurt to look at directly, because his brain could not properly process what his eyes were seeing. Some walked on too many legs. Others floated without visible means of support. All of them radiated a wrongness that made his skin crawl. Do not look at them too long. The Voidborn corrupt perception itself. Stare at them for too long and you risk losing your grip on what is real. Lyraean's voice in his mind pulled Jake's attention away from the horrors below. He forced himself to focus on the landscape rushing past beneath them instead. Ashenwing flew with incredible speed over ruins that stretched as far as the eye could see. Broken cities and shattered forests covered the world like scars on ancient skin. Where are we going? Somewhere safe, or as safe as anywhere can be in a galaxy at war. Ashenwing will take us to the sanctuary where the council meets. It is shielded by the combined magic of all 5 races. Even the Voidborn cannot breach those defenses easily. The dragon banked hard to the left and dove toward what looked like a mountain range in the distance. As they got closer, Jake realized the mountains were not natural formations at all. They were structures built on a scale that made human architecture look like children's toys. Towers of crystal and metal rose thousands of feet into the air. Bridges connected them in complex patterns that suggested both beauty and defensive purpose. Ashenwing landed on a platform near the top of the central tower. The dragon's claws scraped against stone that glowed with a soft inner light. Lyran slid off his back and helped Jake down. His legs felt like rubber after the flight, and he stumbled slightly before catching his balance. The dragon turned his massive head to look at Jake with eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies within them. When Ashenwing spoke this time, his mental voice was quieter and more personal. Walk with me, human. There are things you must understand before you meet the others. Things that Lyraean cannot bring herself to tell you because they pain her too greatly. Jake glanced at the elf woman. She nodded once and turned away to give them privacy. He followed the dragon through a doorway that adjusted its size to accommodate Ashenwing's bulk. They walked down a corridor carved from living stone that pulsed with veins of light. The walls showed images that moved like memories playing out in real time. You think I am Lyraean's pet, her companion animal or servant perhaps. This is not the truth. I did not mean to offend. You have not offended me. I am merely correcting a misunderstanding. Lyran and I are soul bonded. We are 2 halves of one being split across 2 bodies. What she feels, I feel. What I know, she knows. We have fought together for more than 300 years in your time measurement. I have watched her world die slowly and felt her heart break with each loss. The images on the wall shifted to show battles. Jake saw Lyran fighting alongside other elves against creatures he did not recognize. He saw cities burning and people fleeing in terror. He saw the Voidborn consuming everything in their path while the great races fought each other, instead of the true enemy. Why do they hate each other so much? What started all these wars? Ashenwing's mental voice took on a weight that pressed against Jake's consciousness like a physical force. The dragon stopped walking and turned to face him fully. 3,000 years ago, the Draconians betrayed a treaty with the elves. They attacked without warning and slaughtered millions before the elves could mount a defense. 2,000 years ago, the hive mind consumed an entire colony of Lumini during a famine and used their energy to feed its queens. 1,500 years ago, the Marrow flooded 6 draconian worlds in retaliation for the poisoning of their sacred oceans. Each race has committed atrocities against the others. Each has legitimate grievances and ancient wounds that have never healed. But surely they can see that fighting each other while the Voidborn destroy everything is insane. They can see it. They simply cannot stop. Hatred passed down through generations becomes part of a species' identity. The Draconians teach their young that elves are treacherous and weak. The elves teach their children that Draconians are savage and cannot be trusted. The hive mind remembers every slight across millions of individual minds. The Lumini hold grudges that span centuries because they experience time differently than physical beings. And the marrow have memories encoded in their very DNA that go back to the beginning of their race. Jake leaned against the wall and tried to process what he was being told. The scale of it was overwhelming. These were not simple political disputes that could be resolved through negotiation. These were hatreds woven into the fundamental nature of entire civilizations. And you think I can somehow bridge all that? One human who until a few hours ago did not even know any of this existed, Ashenwing moved closer until his face was level with Jake's. The dragon's breath was warm and smelled like ozone after a lightning strike. I do not think you can bridge it. I know you must try because there is no other option left. The prophecy is clear. Only a being with no connection to our ancient wars can serve as the neutral ground. Only someone who sees us all as equally foreign can hold our minds together without being torn apart by our conflicts. The dragon turned and continued walking. Jake followed because there was nothing else to do. They emerged into a vast chamber where the ceiling soared hundreds of feet overhead. In the center of the room stood 5 pillars arranged in a circle. Each pillar was made from a different material and radiated a different type of energy. This is where the unity ritual will take place if you agree to it. Those pillars represent the 5 races. You will stand in the center and open your mind to all of them at once. Their consciousnesses will flow through you, and you will become the bridge that connects them. If you survive the process, you will carry the knowledge and abilities of 5 ancient species. If you do not survive, then everyone dies anyway, just more quickly. What are my actual chances of surviving? Ashenwing was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his mental voice carried a sadness that made Jake's chest ache. Unknown. This has never been attempted before. The prophecy speaks of a human who will unite the races, but it does not specify whether that human will live through the experience. I will not lie to you, Jake Morrison. The odds are not favorable, but they are better than 0, and 0 is what we have without you. Jake walked to the center of the chamber and stood between the 5 pillars. He could feel the energy radiating from each one. They called to something deep in his mind that he did not understand. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine what it would feel like to have 5 completely alien consciousnesses flowing through his brain at the same time. How long do I have to decide? 3 days. The council must meet and agree to the ritual. The representatives of all 5 races must arrive here and prepare themselves. And you must train your mind to withstand what is coming. Lyran will teach you mental disciplines that her people have developed over millennia. It will not be enough, but it will give you a better chance than you have now. A door opened on the far side of the chamber, and Lyran entered, followed by 4 other beings. Jake turned to look at them and felt his breath catch in his throat. Each one was as alien and impossible as the last. The first was a reptilian creature that stood nearly 8 feet tall. Her scales were deep red and gold, and her eyes were vertical slits that seemed to see right through him. She moved with the grace of a predator and carried herself with obvious military bearing. The second was harder to look at directly. She appeared to be made of light and energy contained in a vaguely humanoid shape. Colors swirled through her form like auroras in a night sky. When she moved, she left after images that hung in the air for moments before fading. The third was insectoid with too many limbs and compound eyes that reflected light in disturbing ways. She stood perfectly still, but Jake could sense thousands of other minds connected to hers in a vast network that stretched across space itself. The fourth looked almost human at first glance, but her skin had a faint blue tint and her hair moved like it was underwater. Even though they stood in open air, gills were visible along the sides of her neck and her. The 3 days passed faster than Jake thought possible. Each morning began before the strange sun rose over the shattered landscape. Lyran woke him in the small chamber they had given him, and immediately started the mental exercises. She taught him how to build walls in his mind and then how to tear them down again. She showed him how to expand his consciousness beyond the normal limits of human perception, and then pull it back before it scattered into nothing. The training was agony. Jake's head throbbed constantly and his nose bled at least twice a day from the strain. But slowly he began to understand what Lyran was trying to teach him. The mind was not fixed and rigid like he had always assumed. It was flexible and could be shaped with enough effort and discipline. On the second day, Kyra took over his instruction. The draconian warrior did not believe in gentle teaching methods. She attacked his mind with mental projections of battle and combat scenarios. Jake had to learn to maintain his sense of self while chaos exploded around him. He failed repeatedly, and each failure left him gasping on the floor while Kara stood over him with her arms crossed. Your mind breaks too easily. You collapse at the first sign of pressure. How do you expect to hold 5 consciousnesses when you cannot even hold your own against one? Jake pushed himself back to his feet and wiped blood from his upper lip. His entire body shook with exhaustion, but he forced himself to meet Kyra's vertical slitted eyes. Then hit me again. Keep hitting me until I learn to stand. Something that might have been respect flickered across the Draconian's face. She nodded once and launched another assault. This time, Jake lasted 3 seconds longer before his mental defenses shattered. On the 3rd day, all 5 representatives took turns working with him. Serafina taught him how to perceive energy in its pure form without needing physical senses. Cynthia showed him what it felt like to be connected to thousands of minds at once, and how to filter the noise into useful information. Marina demonstrated how to adapt and flow like water when rigid structures would break under pressure. By the end of the 3rd day, Jake was a wreck. He could barely walk and his hands trembled constantly. But something had changed inside him. His mind felt different now, stretched and scarred, but also stronger in ways he could not quite explain. Lyraean found him sitting alone in the chamber with the 5 pillars. The elf woman sat down beside him and they were quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke in his mind with a gentleness that made his chest ache. You do not have to do this. Even now you can refuse. We brought you here without asking your permission, and that was wrong. You owe us nothing. Jake looked at her profile outlined against the soft glow of the pillars. He thought about everything he had seen over the past 3 days. The ruins of a once beautiful world. The desperate hope in the eyes of beings who had fought for centuries. The darkness spreading across reality itself. If I say no, what happens then? Lyraean was silent for a moment before answering. Then we keep fighting until we cannot fight anymore. The Voidborn continue consuming the galaxy piece by piece. Eventually they reach Earth and your people die without ever knowing what killed them. And somewhere in the dying moments of the universe, the last consciousness thinks about how there was once a chance to stop this and we failed to take it. Jake stood up and walked to the center of the chamber where he would stand during the ritual. The 5 pillars hummed with power that made his teeth ache. He could feel them calling to something deep in his DNA that he did not understand. Ashenwing told me something. He said humans were placed on Earth by beings called the Precursors, that we were isolated on purpose for reasons nobody understands. What if this is why? What if my entire species was kept separate from the galaxy, just so one of us could be here at this exact moment to do this exact thing? Lyraean stood and moved to join him at the center. She took his hands in hers, and her silver eyes reflected the light from all 5 pillars at once. Then perhaps the Precursors knew something we have forgotten. Perhaps they understood that sometimes the solution to an impossible problem must come from outside the system entirely. Perhaps they looked forward through time and saw this moment and prepared for it. The door to the chamber opened and the other 4 representatives entered. Behind them came dozens of beings from all 5 races, scholars and warriors and leaders who had come to witness what might be the last desperate gamble of their civilizations. They filled the chamber until every available space was occupied. The air grew thick with tension and barely contained hope. Ashenwing entered last and moved to a position near the pillars where he could see everything. The dragon's presence seemed to calm some of the nervous energy in the room. He had lived long enough to see empires rise and fall. His very existence was proof that some things could endure. The 5 representatives took their positions at their respective pillars. Lyran stood at the pillar made of living crystal that pulsed with silver light. Kyra positioned herself at the pillar of black stone that radiated heat like a forge. Serafina merged partially with the pillar of pure energy that shifted through every color of the spectrum. Cynthia touched the pillar of organic material that writhed with thousands of small insectoid forms. Marina placed her hands on the pillar of flowing water that defied gravity by standing in a perfect column. Jake stood in the center and tried to control his breathing. Every instinct screamed at him to run. His body knew on some primal level that what was about to happen was not natural or safe, but he forced himself to remain still and focused. Serafina spoke first and her voice echoed through the chamber with crystalline clarity. We begin the unity ritual. Let all who witness understand what happens here today has never been attempted in all the long history of the galaxy. We ask this human to sacrifice himself for species not his own, to bridge gaps that have existed since before his world knew language, to become something new so that we all might survive. Kyra's voice was a growl that resonated in Jake's bones. If this works, we will be bound through him. Our consciousness will flow through his mind and we will experience unity for the first time in millennia. If it fails, we will all die together. There is a certain poetry in that. Cynthia spoke with her 1,000 voices in perfect harmony. The hive mind has calculated every variable and factor. The probability of success remains low, but probability is not destiny. Sometimes the universe surprises even itself. Marina's voice was soft like waves on a distant shore. The Marrow have a saying, the deepest waters hide the strongest currents. This human seems small and fragile, but perhaps beneath that surface there is a strength we cannot see. We shall discover it together. Lyrian looked directly at Jake and he saw tears on her face, though she made no sound. I am sorry for bringing you here. Sorry for asking you to bear this burden. Sorry that your people's isolation had to end this way. But I am grateful beyond words that you chose to stand here anyway. Whatever happens next, know that you gave us hope when we had none. The 5 representatives raised their hands and the pillars began to glow brighter. Energy flowed from each pillar toward the center where Jake stood. He felt it touch his skin like electricity and water and fire and ice and light all at once. His mind began to expand in ways that should not be possible. Lyraean's consciousness touched his first. He felt her exhaustion and her grief and her desperate hope all mixed together. He experienced her memories of a world that once held beauty beyond description. He felt every loss she had suffered over 300 years of war. Then Kyra's mind crashed into his like a tidal wave of fire. He experienced battle rage and warrior pride and the weight of military discipline, beaten into a species over generations. He felt the shame of betrayal and the burning need to prove strength. Seraphina flowed through his consciousness like music made visible. He experienced time as a flexible concept rather than a fixed progression. He felt energy in its pure form without the limitations of physical matter. He understood creation and destruction as 2 parts of the same eternal cycle. Cynthia's thousands of voices filled his head all at once. He experienced connection on a scale his human brain was never meant to process. Millions of individual thoughts all coordinated into perfect unity. He felt the terrible loneliness of being one mind made of many, with no true individual existence. Marina's consciousness washed over him like an ocean tide. He experienced adaptation as a fundamental principle. He felt the memory encoded in DNA going back to the first living things that crawled from primordial seas. He understood that survival meant constant change and evolution. Jake's mind stretched to contain them all. He felt his sense of self beginning to fragment under the pressure. The 5 consciousnesses began fighting each other instinctively. Ancient hatreds rose up like poison. He experienced the draconian betrayal through elven eyes and simultaneously felt draconian justification for that action. He felt the hive mind's hunger and the luminized horror at being consumed. He experienced marrow rage at poisoned oceans and draconian anger at flooded worlds. The conflicts threatened to tear him apart from the inside. Jake screamed without sound as his mind bent under the weight of 5 species worth of trauma and hatred. He could feel himself slipping away as the alien. Jake woke to the sound of alarms screaming through the sanctuary. His eyes opened and for a moment he could not remember who or what he was. 5 different sets of memories tried to surface at once. He saw his childhood on Earth mixed with Lyraean's centuries of battle. He felt Kyra's warrior training overlapping with his own high school years. Seraphina's timeless existence blended with his college days. Cynthia's collective consciousness merged with his individual memories. Marina's ancient oceanic heritage swirled through his human experiences. Then slowly it all settled into something he could understand. He was still Jake Morrison. But he was also something more now, something new. He sat up and found himself in a medical bay surrounded by equipment he somehow knew how to use despite never having seen it before. The knowledge came from Cynthia's vast collected information and Seraphina's understanding of energy systems. His head still throbbed, but the pain was manageable now. Ashenwing's mental voice touched his consciousness gently. You have been unconscious for 6 hours. In that time, the Voidborn have launched their largest assault yet. They know what we did here. They know we created the Unity and they are desperate to destroy it before we can use it against them. Jake stood and was surprised when his legs held steady. His body felt different now, stronger and more coordinated. He realized he was moving with Kyra's warrior grace and Lyraean's elven precision combined. The Unity had changed him in ways that went beyond just mental. Connections. Where are the others? They coordinate the defense from the command center. Come. They need you now. Jake followed the dragon through corridors that shook with distant explosions. Other beings rushed past them, heading toward defensive positions. He saw elves and draconians working side by side without the usual tension. Hive mind drones assisted Lumini energy weapons. Marrow technicians coordinated with all the others through communication systems that bridged their different methods of perception. The unity was working. Just being in Jake's presence seemed to strengthen the bond between the 5 races. They could feel each other through him, and that shared connection made cooperation natural instead of forced. The command center was chaos when Jake entered. Holographic displays showed the battle unfolding in space above the sanctuary. Hundreds of void-born ships descended on the planet while the combined fleet of all 5 races fought to hold them back. The alien vessels moved in perfect coordination now instead of the fractured tactics they had used before. Liren turned when she sensed Jake's presence. Relief flooded through their connection, and he felt it echo back through his link to the others. You are awake? Good. We need your human perspective on this situation. Our fleets fight better together than they ever have, but we are still losing ground. The Voidborn adapt to our tactics faster than we can change them. Jake moved to the central display and studied the battle. Information flowed into his mind from all 5 perspectives at once. He could see the tactical situation like a draconian warrior. He could sense energy flows like a lumini. He could process multiple viewpoints simultaneously like the hive mind. He could find fluid solutions like a marrow. He could perceive the magical patterns like an elf. But underneath all that alien knowledge, his human brain worked in ways none of them expected. He saw patterns they missed because they were too close to their own methods of thinking. They are not adapting randomly. Look at the attack vectors. They focus on the points where our different technologies connect. They hit the seams in our cooperation because those are still our weakest points. Kyra growled and her claws scraped against the metal table. Then how do we eliminate those seams? We have only been fighting together for hours. It will take time to perfect our coordination. Jake shook his head and felt 5 different thought processes working through the problem at once. Then the solution clicked into place with sudden clarity. We do not eliminate the seams. We use them. The Voidborn expect our coordination to be imperfect because theirs is perfect. They move as one consciousness. But we are 5 separate species working together by choice. That makes us unpredictable in ways they cannot calculate. Seraphina's form pulsed with colors that indicated confusion mixed with interest. Explain this human reasoning. How does imperfection become an advantage? Jake pulled up different sections of the battle display and marked specific locations. Here, and these 3 points. Those are where our fleets naturally create gaps in formation, because we are still learning to fight together. The Voidborn see those gaps as weaknesses, and they pour forces into them. But what if those gaps are not accidents? What if we deliberately create openings that look like coordination, failures but are actually traps? Marina's black eyes reflected the holographic light as understanding dawned. We bait them into positions where we can surround and eliminate them. We use their expectations of our weakness against them. This is very human thinking. Deception as a core strategy. Zynthia's 1,000 voices spoke in harmony. The hive mind approves this approach. We have combat data from 10,000 historical battles. Never have we employed systematic deception on this scale. The Voidborn will not expect it, because none of the 5 races have ever fought this way before. Jake worked with the 5 representatives to refine the plan. He showed them how to create formations that looked uncoordinated, but were actually precisely calculated traps. How to make their different fighting styles appear to clash while actually complementing each other. How to use the Voidborn's perfect coordination against them by making their own tactics deliberately chaotic. Within an hour, they had transmitted new orders to the fleet. Jake watched the displays as the ships began implementing the strategy. To any outside observer, it looked like the alliance was falling apart under pressure. Gaps opened in their formations. Ships from different races seemed to drift out of position. Coordination appeared to break down. The Voidborn took the bait. Their ships surged forward into what they perceived as vulnerable points. Then the traps sprang closed. Elven magic had been concealed in those apparently weak formations. Draconian fire ships hidden by Lumini energy cloaking suddenly appeared. Hive-mind vessels swarmed from unexpected angles. Marrow gravity weapons activated and crushed Voidborn ships against each other. The first major group of enemy vessels vanished in explosions of dark energy. The Voidborn fleet hesitated for the first time since the battle began. Their perfect coordination faltered as they tried to calculate what had happened. Jake felt a surge of hope through his connection to the others. It was working. For the first time in this long war, the Voidborn were truly surprised, but his celebration died quickly. On the edge of the display, something new appeared. A massive structure that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. It was larger than any ship they had encountered, and it radiated wrongness on a scale that made the other Voidborn vessels look almost natural by comparison. Ashenwing's mental voice carried genuine fear for the first time since Jake had met him. That is a Nexus, a command ship that coordinates entire sectors of Voidborn forces. We have never seen one this close to our core territories before. If it fully enters our dimensional space, it will anchor the Voidborn here permanently. This entire region of the galaxy will become theirs. Lorraine grabbed Jake's arm and her fingers dug into his flesh hard enough to hurt. We cannot let that thing establish itself here. If it does, we lose everything. Jake studied the Nexus and felt his expanded consciousness struggle to process what he was seeing. The structure existed in multiple dimensions at once. Attacking it from normal space would be like trying to hurt someone by punching their shadow. We need to go after it directly. Send a strike team to board that thing and destroy it from the inside. Kyra's laugh was harsh and bitter. Board a Nexus? You might as well suggest we fly into a star. Nothing survives inside those structures. They exist partially in the void itself. Anyone who enters will be torn apart by conflicting realities. Jake looked at Ashenwing, and understanding passed between them without words. The dragon was a keeper, an ancient guardian species that could channel the raw energy of creation, and Jake was now the unity that bound 5 races together. Combined, they might be able to survive where nothing else could. Ashenwing will take us, the 5 representatives and myself. We use the unity to anchor ourselves to this reality, while his keeper abilities protect us from the void. We board that thing and destroy it from within. Serafina pulsed with colors that indicated both admiration and concern. This plan has minimal probability of success, but it also has a non-zero probability, which is more than any other option provides. Marina moved to stand beside Jake, and the others quickly joined them. Then we go together. The unity was forged so we could fight as one. Time to prove it was worth the cost. Within minutes, they were aboard, Ashenwing and flying toward the Nexus. The dragon was large enough to carry all 6 of them, and his keeper powers created a protective bubble around them. Below, the battle raged on as the combined fleet held the line against the Voidborn forces. As they approached the Nexus, reality began to twist in ways that hurt to perceive. Space folded in on itself. Time flowed in multiple directions at once. The laws of physics became suggestions rather than rules. The 5 representatives felt Jake begin to unravel the unity, and panic flooded through their shared connection. Lyran screamed in his mind as the bond that linked them all started coming apart. Kyra roared in protest, and Serafina's form flickered wildly between colors. Cynthia's 1,000 voices cried out in confusion, and Marina grabbed at Jake physically as if she could hold the connection together through sheer force. "What are you doing? This will kill us all. The psychic backlash will destroy everything we built." Jake pushed them back gently but firmly. His human mind worked through the problem in ways none of them could follow, because they were too deeply invested in their own perspectives. The unity was powerful, but it was also exactly what the Voidborn Queen wanted. She needed that connection intact so she could use it as a doorway to control all 5 races at once. Trust me, I know what I am doing. The unity does not have to be a permanent bond. It was never meant to be chains that locked us together forever. It was supposed to be a bridge that showed us we could work together. We have crossed that bridge now. We do not need it anymore. The Voidborn Queen laughed, and the sound made reality shiver. She moved closer with predatory grace that belonged to something that had hunted across dimensions for eons. Foolish human. You think destroying the unity will save you? It will only make your deaths quicker. Without that connection, you are just 6 individuals against a being that has consumed galaxies. You cannot hope to stand against me. Jake felt the threads of the unity pulling apart in his mind. The connection between himself and the 5 representatives grew thinner and more fragile with each passing second. But instead of weakening them, something else was happening. They were not losing their bond. They were transforming it into something new. You are right that we cannot beat you with force. You are too powerful and we are too small. But you made one critical mistake. You assume that because you created life in this galaxy, you understand it. You do not. You never did. That is why your experiment failed. The Queen's form solidified into something almost human-shaped. Her eyes burned with light that came from dying stars, and her voice dropped to a whisper that somehow filled the entire impossible space. Explain yourself before I consume you. I am curious what delusions a primitive species could develop in its brief existence. Jake looked at the 5 representatives standing around him. He saw the fear in their eyes, but also the trust. They did not understand his plan, but they believed in him anyway. That faith meant more than any magical bond ever could. You created life as an experiment in control. You wanted to guide evolution toward some perfect end state that existed only in your imagination. But life does not work that way. Life is messy and chaotic and unpredictable. It evolves in directions nobody can anticipate. It adapts and changes and grows. And the moment you try to control it completely, you kill everything that makes it valuable. The Queen tilted her head and studied Jake with interest that felt like being examined by a microscope that could see through dimensions. And what does this philosophical observation accomplish? You still stand in my domain surrounded by my power. Your unity crumbles as we speak. Soon you will be separate and weak, and I will consume you one by one. Jake smiled, and it was a very human expression, full of confidence he did not entirely feel. The unity was never our real weapon against you. It was just the tool we needed to learn how to cooperate. But cooperation does not require a psychic bond. It just requires mutual respect and common purpose. The 5 races are not united because I forced them to be. They are united because they chose to be, and that choice is something you can never consume or control. As the last threads of the unity dissolved, Jake felt something unexpected happen. Instead of separating completely, the 5 representatives remained connected through their shared experience. They had lived inside each other's minds. They had experienced each other's pain and joy and memories. That understanding did not vanish just because the magical bond was gone. Lorraine raised her hands and silver light gathered around her fingers. Kyra ignited with dragonfire that burned with heat from the cores of dead stars. Seraphina expanded into pure energy that filled the space with rainbow brilliance. Cynthia's form split into thousands of individual drones that moved with perfect coordination. Marina called water from nowhere and shaped it into weapons that defied physics. Ashenwing roared and his keeper powers activated fully. The dragon became something more than physical. He was a channel for the raw creative energy that existed before matter and time. That primal force flowed through him and into Jake, and through Jake into the 5 representatives. But it was different now. Without the unity binding them, they were not controlled or coordinated by Jake's consciousness. They were individuals choosing to fight together. And that made them unpredictable in ways the Queen could not calculate. The battle that followed existed partially outside normal time and space. The 6 of them attacked as one, but not in perfect coordination. They moved like jazz musicians improvising around a central theme. Sometimes they harmonized and sometimes they clashed, but it was all part of the same performance. Lorraine's magic created shields that protected the others, but also left deliberate openings. Kyra charged through those openings with pure aggression that seemed reckless but was actually calculated. Seraphina shifted between energy states in patterns that had no logic, but somehow always positioned her exactly where she needed to be. Cynthia's drones swarmed in formations that looked chaotic but concealed deadly precision. Marina flowed around everyone else like water finding cracks in stone. And Jake stood at the center of it all, coordinating without controlling. He called out suggestions and warnings but left the actual decisions to each individual. He trusted them to know their own abilities better than he ever could. That trust was the real weapon. The Voidborn Queen tried to counter their attacks, but her perfect tactical mind could not predict their imperfect cooperation. She was designed to fight armies that moved with rigid order. She could calculate the optimal response to any coordinated assault. But she had no framework for understanding beings who worked together while remaining completely independent. Jake saw the moment when she realized she was losing. The Queen's form flickered and genuine emotion crossed her face for the first time. It might have been fear or it might have been wonder. Perhaps for her they were the same thing. How? How can disorder defeat order? How can chaos overcome perfection? This violates every principle of efficient design. Jake dodged a blast of void energy and felt Ashenwing's protective field absorb most of the impact. He called back to the Queen while the 5 representatives pressed their assault from every angle. Because perfection is brittle, it cannot adapt when conditions change. But chaos is flexible. Disorder can evolve. Cooperation without control creates something stronger than any rigid system, because it can respond to the unexpected. That is what you never understood about the life you created. Its strength comes from its imperfection. The Queen's defenses were crumbling now. She tried to consume Xinthia's drones, but they split apart faster than she could absorb them. She attempted to freeze Seraphina's energy, but the Lumini shifted to frequencies the Queen had never encountered. She reached for Kyra, but the Draconian burned with fire hot enough to harm even beings made of void. She tried to drown Marina, but the marrow simply became part of the water and reformed elsewhere. She struck at Lyrian, but the elf's shields held through sheer determination. And through it all, Ashenwing channeled creation energy into Jake, and Jake shared it freely with everyone else, not forcing it on them but offering it as a gift they could accept or refuse as they chose. The Queen fell to her knees and her form began to destabilize. The madness that had consumed her for eons started to crack, and beneath it Jake saw something else, pain and loneliness and desperate need for connection that had been twisted into hunger for control. He stepped forward despite the danger and reached out to touch her dissolving form. The contact sent shockwaves through dimensions, but Jake held firm. He let her see through his eyes and experience what it meant to be mortal and flawed and free. You do not have to be this. You are not always a monster. Somewhere inside you is the being who first looked at empty worlds and decided to fill them with life. That part of you still exists. You can choose to let go of your need for control. You can choose to be free. For a moment, the Queen's eyes cleared. She looked at Jake and the 5 representatives in Ashenwing and saw them as they truly were. Imperfect beings working together not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Creatures who argued and disagreed and made mistakes, but who chose cooperation anyway. Life in all its messy, beautiful chaos. A single tear rolled down her face, and where it fell, the crystallized void began to crack. The Nexus started to collapse as she released her grip on the consumed realities she had been holding prisoner for millennia. Worlds that had been erased began to flicker back into existence. Stars that had been extinguished reignited. The void-born ships scattered across the galaxy lost their coordination and started to dissipate. I was so afraid that if I did not control everything, it would all spiral.